Hey, indie filmmakers, I'm Griffin Hammond.
I'm Nick Bodmer, and on this week's episode, Griffin is in Alaska, filming up close with bears. Let's find out how he's staying safe.
Plus, your questions about camera cages, budget lenses, and why I stopped shooting with variable ND filters. Hello, Nick.
Griffin, you're alive.
I'm alive, yes.
Did we talk about the fact that you were going to go shoot video with bears? Because all of a sudden, you show up on my Facebook feed with all these bears, and that was news to me.
Yeah, I think it was news to a lot of people. I started sharing some photos and video of bears up here in Alaska and got a lot of concerned comments.
You looked like you were really close, and those looked like really big bears.
Yeah, they're big brown bears, and sometimes we were kind of close, but I guess today I do want to talk about how we managed to get the shots that we were getting and also how we stayed safe while doing it. Because I think some of the techniques we use to stay safe won't work with every bear, so don't go out. I'm not recommending you run out today and start filming bears. I think there's a safe way to do it.
So why are you in Alaska filming bears?
Well, I've had a unique opportunity to meet up with and learn from several photographers, and so I actually spent this weekend in a part of Alaska that's just a little bit south of Anchorage. It's called Silver Salmon Creek Lodge, and I was there with wildlife photographer Daniel J. Cox.
Okay.
So he's a professional. He knows what he's doing, and I was able to learn a few things from him. And
about bear safety.
Yeah, about bears, filming bears and bear safety. Did you see any of the footage that I shared?
Just a very little. I have had a crazy week, so I haven't had a ton of time to look at stuff. So
I mean, one of the most amazing things that we saw was it's pretty easy to find bears in this place because the tides come up and down, and when the tides are low, the bears go out to the beach and they find fish that have gotten stuck. And then when the tides go up, the bears go up into the grass. So, and there's guides at this lodge, so they're kind of taking us to where the bears are. And so at one point we found this mother bear and her two cubs, and they're walking through the river. They're walking around our group. We were in a pretty big group most of the time. And then they all just fell asleep in this field together. And most of the group decided, okay, that's enough. We got enough footage. And Dan and I and a few others decided we should stick around because Dan thought that they would probably do something. They're going to wake up eventually. And sure enough, after waiting for about half an hour, I shot a time lapse during that half an hour, the bears got the mom to sit up straight and they started nursing with her.
Oh, okay.
So we got some great footage of that. He got great photos. I got some cool video. And I also, the next day, saw a bear cub licking a clamshell. They eat clams. And what was so funny is I didn't even know what I had until I looked at the footage. It was on a tripod. And really, it wasn't until I was in the editing that I realized as one of the cub siblings walks by, this cub decides to cover up and hide the clam. Like, don't look at what I'm doing. This is mine. So just a lot of cool things like that happened while we were there.
That's awesome. So you were in a group most of the time, and I'm sorry, who's the photographer that you said you were with?
I'm with Dan Cox. In fact, he's here right now, so I should probably just. We're in this hotel together, the Crown Plaza.
Oh, very cool.
I figured rather than just playing a soundbite of him talking about bear safety, we could ask him those questions. Dan, do you want to come over to this side?
Coming to you live from Bear Country.
So I guess, Nick, I want to know what's your most pressing bear safety question?
My philosophy on bear safety has always been you don't have to be faster than the bear, just faster than the slowest person in the group. Is that pretty much the accepted philosophy? Griffin, do you feel like you could outrun Dan, or is Dan quite a sprinter?
Well, it's not. It's a popular myth, but and I suppose if you were Usain Bolt, it might work for you for a short distance, but it's a little more complicated than that.
Yeah. So tell me the tenets of, like, what did we do to stay safe?
Well, there's a couple of number of things. Number one, that's the most important thing is the safety of the bears. Really, people don't understand this, but as long as the bears are safe, you're going to be generally safe. And we do things to make sure the bears stay safe. And that is, one, we travel with a decent sized group, anywhere from 6 to sometimes as many as 10 people.
Yeah.
There's no food. Nobody brings any food in the field. There's always a respect for the bears, staying a decent length from where they're at. When we did the pictures of the mom and cubs sleeping, we were, 50 yards, which sounds kind of close, but when you're using telephoto lenses, you can stay back at least 50 yards and have reasonable safety. The other thing that's very unique about these bears that you and I worked with was the fact that they are what I refer to as fat and happy bears here in Alaska. They're feeding on salmon. In fact, when you and I were there, we were just at the very beginning of the salmon run, and so they have a lot of food to feed on. Prior to that, they were feeding on sedges, and then in between the sedges and the salmon, they go up into the mountains for berries. So they have a lot of food here, as opposed to where I come from in Montana. Yeah. Bears that have very little food. They're stressed for food.
My understanding is that if we were in Montana, we wouldn't have been able to get as close.
No. It's in fact, that's a really important thing to keep in mind, is that the bears in Montana and the lower 48 and interior Alaska even are totally different bears than the ones that live along the coast in Alaska and British Columbia and Canada in general, along the western coast of Canada and Alaska.
And our guides that were with us were watching for bear behavior. They know that if the bears start walking big and pushing us off our territory.
That's a perfect way to explain it. The walking big, and we never saw that any time that we were there. And they just are they're basically habituated to people. They're in a park. They don't get hunted. There's a lot of hunting here in Alaska. These bears don't get hunted. They've come to realize that these guys don't hurt us. We don't hurt them. We've got a lot of food. They give us respect. We stay our distance, use telephoto lenses, and everybody comes out of it in a positive way.
Well, and one thing I learned when I got there and was reading about how to stay safe around these bears, it sounded like it was important to act predictable, act normal as humans, because they are used to humans, but not if you start waving your hands and
jumping up and down,
throwing off an air horn or something.
Yeah, that's right. They're used to people quietly walking, moving from one point to the next. If they come walking by, you don't go running off fearful that they're going to attack. That's not normal.
Right.
So you literally just stand there with a group, and maybe sometimes you don't have people on the outside of the group. You try to stay together fairly tight, and they see you as just a little cohesive unit that doesn't bother them, and they won't bother you.
Yeah. I was amazed that when we were filming around the mother bears, that they seemed to kind of drop their guard around us, and would even go on one side of our group and leave the cubs on another side.
Yeah, people associate mother bears and baby bears with extreme danger.
Yeah.
And there's no doubt if anybody would go up and pull the tail of a little bear, you would be in serious trouble.
Yeah.
But what the mothers have come, and I've seen this for all the 30 years that I've been coming to Alaska, there's places that we can come here to take pictures of bears, and when they come to realize that the humans are not a problem, I've actually had places here in Alaska where we're relegated to staying on a platform area, and the mothers will bring the baby bears up in this gravel platform, drop them off 5-10 feet from the gravel platform. Basically, however the bears tell them to stay, we'll say stay, and then she'll go off and feed in the little valley down by the river on her own. And what she's doing is that during that time of year, there's big males around. And she trusts actually humans more than they trust the big males, because the big males will take the little cubs. And they've come to understand, the humans don't bother these little guys, and they're way safer than those big males out there in the field. And so I'm going to go set them up here next to the humans. Now, you don't mess with them. They just sit there, they sleep, they might do a few, role play a little bit, and you don't interact with them in any way. But if you keep your distance and keep your composure and just stand there, you can be extremely, tied into nature like you've never expected.
Yeah. And just to reiterate a disclaimer, these are the bears in Lake Clark National Park.
Yes.
They act a certain way.
Yeah.
That's not every bear.
Yeah, I can't say enough. You don't do anything like this with interior bears, because interior bears are stressed for food. They're grumpy. They're so-called hangry. They're always looking for something to eat, and and they're grumpy about it most of the time. So it's a totally different animal as far as their disposition on the coasts of Alaska and Canada.
Right.
I'm just curious, has Dan ever worked with different kinds of bears, grizzly bears, or something that's a little more difficult to interact with?
I have, Nick, but and that's a good question. But the way I've done it is I do live close to Yellowstone National Park, and we do see bears in Yellowstone quite regularly during certain times of the year. But I've never shot any of my work in Yellowstone away from the road. I have, I stay on the road. I have my pickup that I camp in right next to the road. I don't hike after bears in Yellowstone or Glacier or northern Canada at all. Have never done that. It's all shot from the side of the road in the safety of a vehicle.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much, Dan.
You bet. It's been fun working with you, and I can't say how much I've learned from you, and it's been a lot of fun seeing the cine side of it. I do a little bit of video stuff, but for the most part, I'm a still photographer, and it's been a lot of fun learning a little more about the cinematography side of things.
I've really enjoyed spending the weekend with you.
Yeah. Good.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
You bet.
Thanks, Dan.
Did you see the time lapse that I shot last night?
I didn't. I'm so out of the loop. Can I find it real quick and look at it while we talk?
Sure. Last night, it was my last night up at this near Lake Clark, and I knew where the moon was going to come out. I was using one of those astronomy apps, and I could see the moon was just below the horizon. So I decided to point my camera that way, and I captured a 10-second exposure every 20 seconds. So I was doing 3 photos a minute, and got a pretty cool time lapse over the next 90 minutes. Actually went to sleep.
It. Oh wow! And it goes behind the clouds.
It almost looks like a
awesome.
sunrise. Like I'm
It
getting,
really does.
but it's the moon rising. It's half a moon, so it looks kind of interesting.
It's like 3/4 almost even.
Yeah.
And look, I just now noticed the stars in the background too.
Yeah. There's some
Great
good star
star
movement
movement.
there.
That's awesome. No, that's really cool.
So yeah, everything was
I like that a
beautiful,
lot.
beautiful up here. This was actually my first trip up to Alaska, and I really enjoyed it. Came away with some great footage of animals. Also saw puffins.
Those are like funny birds.
Funny birds.
Right.
It's funny how ignorant I am. I thought that puffins were more like penguins. I didn't think they actually flew, but that's...
I was just gonna say that. That's what you see at the zoo. They're always by the penguins standing on rocks.
Yeah, but they were flying around. That's all they were doing. They go out to sea and hunt for little fish, and then they come back. The hilarious thing is that they don't have talons, so they can't land on like a tree branch. They have little duck feet. And so what they do is they just come in for a landing, and they just land on their butt. They just kind of
I noticed you did some cool shots of birds in flight, kind of showing the various stages. How did you put those together? Are those from video stills, or were you shooting photos?
I wasn't taking a lot of photos on this trip, mostly because I was here to shoot video. But I'm shooting in 4K, and the resolution's pretty good. And so I had some shots of puffins flying, and so I just took some of the clearest frames of that, some of the fastest shutter and least motion blur, and I just composited a few of them together. I did that with a puffin. I also did that with a bald eagle that we saw.
That's cool. That's very cool.
I mean,
One of them looked like a continuous background, but you'd put multiple frames of the bird in, or was I just missing the seams because I was looking on mobile?
yeah, that was what I did with the bald eagle. That was actually a relatively low-res shot. I'm shooting with my 35 to 100 millimeter, so it's not the perfect telephoto lens for wildlife. So it was a relatively wide shot, and so I just thought the shot wasn't that interesting on its own, but if I took several good frames and stitched them together, I actually just did some feathering. It was pretty much against a plain blue sky, so it was pretty easy for me to feather all those images together, and it looks relatively seamless.
Yeah, it looked really great on Facebook or Instagram or wherever wherever I followed you.
Yeah.
Speaking of, before I forget, let's make sure we get Dan's Instagram or wherever we can go see some of his work.
Oh,
I'd
yeah.
love to follow him, so we'll get that in the show notes.
Oh yeah, we'll definitely put Dan's information in the show notes so you can follow his stuff.
Definitely want to check that out. That is very cool.
And if you missed any
scary.
of these things that I've been sharing, I think I've been mostly sharing them on Instagram and Facebook, so we'll link to that too.
Awesome. So, was it scary? Like, were you worried at first, or
I was worried
what was
on the
it
way
like?
to this trip because everyone kept telling me not to get eaten by bears. My mom seemed worried.
How did I not know you were going on this trip? I mean, did I just miss it? Like, or did you not tell anybody? It was like a secret.
I think it's just I've been doing so many trips.
It's hard to keep track of you.
I also didn't know exactly what this was going to be. I've never been to Alaska before, and I've never been around bears, so I didn't know.
I mean, it's fascinating. And the closest, you had 100-meter... I can't talk today. 100-millimeter lens is the tightest lens you had available to you?
Yeah, Dan was shooting with a 1 to 400 millimeter lens, so that was perfect. I was getting, my shots, if you look at them, weren't crazy tight. Although occasionally the animals came close enough that I was able to get a pretty good close up. But
It looked like you were filling the frame. Am I just seeing crops a lot, or
some of those, may have been cropped images. Yeah.
Okay. And did you use telephoto mode or anything like that?
Oh yeah, I
the
did.
4K punch-in?
I did use that. I have not used it until this trip, and then realized it's perfect for that. There's this feature on the Panasonic cameras called extended teleconversion, and if you've used the GH4, you know that when you went to 4K mode, it actually cropped in a little bit tighter. I forget, does your G85 do that?
It crops a little bit, but not anywhere like what it did on the GH4. There was a pretty dramatic crop on the GH4, wasn't it? Or was it only a little?
I mean, it wasn't that bad, but it cropped in a little bit. That's just because it was using the middle 4K pixels on the sensor. The sensor is actually bigger than 4K video. On the GH5, they fixed that, so 1080 video and 4K all have the exact same crop factor. But if you want, you can take advantage of that crop factor. You can actually turn on extended teleconversion, and it punches in the shot a little bit, which was great for me to get just a little bit tighter on the animals.
That's awesome.
Without any reduction of quality, because you're still shooting the same number of pixels.
Well, what else can you tell us about it, or should we answer some emails?
Let's see. I don't know. I guess I recommend it. You should come to Alaska.
Hey, tell me you're going. Maybe I'll come.
Yeah. But yeah, let's look. Oh, I guess I should answer these questions that I got about shooting, although we may have also already covered these. I got a couple tweets from Mark Henry Cooney, who was wondering what is a safe focal length, and he was asking about would a good 200 millimeter be good? Like I said, I was shooting with a 35 to 100, which is a 200 millimeter equivalent on a full frame, and that was not quite tight enough. I definitely need to get the Panasonic 1 to 400. That's what Dan was using. That would be a 200 to 800 equivalent on full frame.
Okay.
So that's a good lens for that. And then he followed up. I told him that I was being safe because these are well-fed bears, and he said, well-fed with the humans right before you? No, luckily.
You always want to be in the second group of the day. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, no. These are not human-hungry bears. He was also curious if the seasonal angle of the sun, how that affected what we were doing.
Because it's a low angle in the sky most of the day. Is that the idea?
Yeah, it was never directly above us, and it also was just a long day. I think the sun rose at 6 a.m. and set a little bit after 10 p.m.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
It's a lot of light.
So yeah, I mean, it just limited. We had to wait a while to get some of the best light. Although we were pretty lucky. It was pretty cloudy for most of our trip, which is actually looked really nice on the fur. Just that soft light looked really good with the grass and everything, and the mountains in the background.
I just shot a wedding this past week at Pebble Beach, and it was overcast, and I could tell they were a little upset. It was overcast, and I said, no. For photos and video, overcast is amazing.
Oh yeah,
Makes everybody look great.
the only downside is the way it can blow out the sky.
Yeah.
But you're not seeing blue skies. But yeah, the effect on the bride and groom are perfect.
So we've got a YouTube comment from, oh boy, It's a tough one.
I
Bjarne?
think you're right.
Jacques.
I think it's probably Bjarne.
Thanks, Bjarne. Hi, Griffin and Nick. What do you recommend as a starter Panasonic lens kit?
You know, this is actually a great question. I don't think he was expecting to be on the podcast. This is a great question for Tom Curley, who works for Panasonic. Tom, you want to come over here? We have
You're just in a room full of people I'm not expecting. This
yeah,
is
I'm in a
blowing
room.
my mind.
I'm in a room at the at our hotel, and Dan and Tom is here. Tom, the question from our audience is, what do you recommend as a starter Panasonic lens kit?
Oh, okay. I thought you were going to throw me a tough one on the spot here.
Softball.
We've got the 12 to 60 Leica,
Yeah.
which is kind of similar to the 12 to 35 with that extra focal length. And now, even more recently, the 8 to 18, which can replace the 7 to 14. It's brighter. It's also a bit more expensive, not much. So you could really go one of two ways. You could go with the 12 to 35, 35 to 100, get some nice, all the way out to that 200 equivalent. Or you could go with the two new lenses, which are Leica branded,
Right.
and a little more premium.
And that 12 to 60 seems like a good option for a lot of people. It's a good focal range. It's an f2.8 to 4.
Yes, that's
At
correct.
the zoomed in end. But I've seen you shooting with that a lot. I've seen Dan shooting with that. It seems like it's getting great.
In fact, on this trip, it's the only lens I used because I wanted to pack really light on this trip.
Yeah.
And I decided I didn't want to or need to bring the really long lens that Dan was shooting with. And I'm just so happy with that lens as a general all-purpose.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
Do you have
Now,
any?
I will say,
Yeah.
I do have some comments on that. I was, when I bought my last lens, I was torn between the 12 to 35 and the 12 to 60, right?
Right.
He was talking about the Leica.
Yeah, that's the new one.
For me, for video, I wanted the constant f2.8 aperture, which the 12 to 35 has. So that's why I kind of selected that one over the 12 to 60, which I think you said is f2.8 to f4. And I think I did read that it does, that aperture drops pretty quick in the zoom range. So for me, the 12 to 35 I think was the better fit, but I think they're both great lenses.
And if you have the budget for it, it seems like what serves most videographers pretty well is to have one zoom lens and one prime lens, because you'll probably need some good low light performance that maybe your zoom lens can't deliver in like really low light situations.
For someone who doesn't do a ton of video anymore, I have a lot of lenses. So right now I've got the 12 to 35 I'm shooting with. I've got the 14 to 140 that I was just shooting a wedding with.
Right.
I've got this 15 millimeter prime. I've got a 45 millimeter prime. I've got a 14 millimeter prime and a 20 millimeter prime.
Yeah.
Do I have a problem?
Do you still have that? Yeah, you just mentioned the 20 millimeter, right?
Yeah, that was my workhorse. Kind of. I guess it's not really super wide angle these days, but for weddings and stuff like that, I use that constantly. It's great on a glide cam. Great just walking around.
And it's
lens.
a small lens.
Yeah,
it's that pancake
It's
lens.
a pancake, so you can just walk around with it, and the camera's super light and portable. So yes, I love that lens. I find the 12 to 35.
I don't know
I
don't know the exact price on that, but that's got to be a pretty good price on the 20 millimeter.
Oh, I think so.
So here's an email we got from Marcus, who just got a new camera. He's actually, I think he got the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, and he doesn't have any lenses yet. He has a budget of around $1,000 US, and he doesn't need anything over 100 millimeters, but he'd like at least 80 millimeters of zoom, and he'd also like to be able to go 10 to 12 millimeters wide. He's wondering what he might be able to do.
Well,
That's a lot of
requirements. So, I mean, what we just talked about, the 12 to 35 combined with the 35 to 100 is going to cover that range well, but I don't think you can get both of those for $1,000. They're probably...
Right, that's going to double his budget right there.
Yeah. You might look at something like this lens, which came with their original GH1, the Panasonic 14 to 140 that I think they've made a bunch of. Not quite as fast as those other lenses, but I think you'd definitely be able to get in there for less than $1,000, right? Like I think this one's probably pretty cheap, especially used these days. So, Panasonic 14 to 140, definitely one to take a look at.
And depending on what kind of filming you're doing, maybe you want the range but don't need the actual zoom in between. I mean, you could probably get a lot of that with 2 primes or something.
Yeah, something like a 12 millimeter prime and whatever the long prime is. I actually don't even know.
Yeah. I mean, my longest prime is the 42.5, which I love, but that's an expensive lens. That would blow your whole budget right there.
Yeah, I have a 45 millimeter Olympus prime. That's pretty good, but...
Do you want to read our next YouTube comment?
Oh, I would love to, my friend. I would love to if it still works on my computer. We have a YouTube comment from Matter Graphica. That's kind of a cool name. I'm thinking of getting a GH5 soon. I've never used Micro Four Thirds system camera before. There's an accessory that a lot of people have been recommending to him, the Metabone Speed Booster. He knows it's a lens mount adapter, but he doesn't understand what's special about it and why he wouldn't just choose a more affordable regular adapter.
That's a great question, because yeah, the Metabone Speed Booster is really expensive, and there are people that make other similar ones that are a little bit less expensive, but then you're probably seeing the really inexpensive lens mounts. There are some that cost like $10 or $50.
Yeah, I've got a cheapy, like $30 one I got from Nikon to Micro Four Thirds.
Exactly.
It's just a piece of metal.
It's really just a metal ring. Yeah, you don't, you really just need to get the space between the sensor just a little bit longer onto some of those Canon lenses or Nikon lenses. The trick, though, with the Metabone Speed Booster, the reason people are excited about it is because when you put a full-frame lens on a Micro Four Thirds camera, you crop in. You don't actually see everything the lens sees.
Right.
So the Metabone Speed Booster refocuses the light. It has a little piece of glass right there, and it's taking advantage of all the viewing power of that lens. And then the consequence, too, of going from this bigger lens onto a smaller sensor is you actually get, I think, usually an extra stop of light performance. So an f2.8 lens becomes an f2 lens when you put it on a speed booster. That's what they call it, a speed booster, because it's improving the speed of the lens.
Yeah, which is awesome. So, if you've already got existing Canon or Nikon lenses, it's a really good way to get some really good glass out of it. Now, do you know, does the Metabone Speed Booster allow for any electronic adjustments?
That's what always confuses me. I think on some lenses it does, and some it doesn't. In my experience, I've lost control of electronic focus. Some lenses can do it, some can't. Or no, I've had focus, but I've lost like electronic control of the aperture. So it'll vary.
I guess I'd rather have focus than anything else.
Right. And I think you made a good point about it. If you already have Canon and Nikon glass or other big glass, then yeah, you may not want to invest in new lenses, and you may want to get a speed booster. But I think a lot of people get the speed booster because they think it's the ultimate way to get low light performance. And I don't think going out and buying a speed booster and new glass is the way to go, when a lot of native glass can get you there, and it won't be as big.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it won't be as expensive.
Won't be as big, bulky, and it'll work better because it's all designed electronically to work together.
Here's an email we got from Jim, and he knows that I travel light, and he's wondering if I've ever used a cage to put a monitor or a mic on while filming. I have used a cage before. Have you ever used a cage, Nick?
I mean, just that little half moon one we had that one time.
Oh yeah, that giant one.
Yeah.
Yeah, when we got the GH1, we got the Indie System Ultra Compact. Is that what it was called?
That's right. I don't know how you remember that kind of thing, but...
And it was a really heavy shoulder rig thing, but it also had kind of a
Was it made out of steel or something? It was like...
Yeah.
Not lightweight at
Yeah,
all.
it wasn't made out
but
of
it was in our
aluminum. It was
budget.
way too heavy.
It was in our budget.
Yeah, I think it was like $150. And it was kind of
we
cool,
loaded
and we
that
got
thing
it
up.
because it... Yeah, you could put your audio recorder on the side. But I think my shooting style, I found eventually, I don't need to carry this giant thing around. And they do now make much more compact things called cages, which like fit the camera perfectly. People design them specifically for each camera body, and they just give you a ton of screw holes on the outside of the camera so you can mount things all over the place. They're cool, but I've just found I don't even need my camera to be 1 centimeter larger in every dimension and a tiny bit heavier. And I'm never really thinking I need to mount an audio recorder right on the camera when an audio recorder could sit in a shoulder bag.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually how I've done a lot of my interviews. Oh, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah. I was just gonna say, and you've got a hot shoe right there if you need to just stick a shotgun mic or something light and easy on there.
Yeah, usually I only ever need to put 1 or 2 things. They make adapters for hot shoes, so a cage just isn't something I've needed.
Makes sense. There, I brought it back, guys. Makes
We have
sense.
a Facebook. Yeah, makes sense. I think people commented that you replaced "makes sense" with "cool" on the last episode.
Cool makes sense.
No, now we've created a monster. Our final question today is a Facebook message from Andrew, who notices that I use several different ND filters, and he's wondering why I do that instead of just using one ND filter with a broad range of exposures. He's talking about a variable ND filter, and he's specifically wondering if it reduces sharpness, which actually I don't know the answer to that question.
Well, it's a good question. You do get some weirdness with variable ND filters that I've read about. Now, I've never really used one, so this is all kind of anecdotal, but I have heard, well, one, you're putting 2 elements of glass in front of your lens, so you're always going to be reducing sharpness a little bit there. But I think the real problem is the variable ND filters work by having 2 different polarizing filters that kind of, overlap, and as you adjust their rotation, it adjusts how much light gets through or what angle of light gets through, and there can be some weird artifacts. Like you'll hear about the X effect when you really get extremely dark on a variable ND filter, and that's just, I think that's
what I've experienced.
Oh, have you? Okay, I haven't, but this is what I read about. You've got a linear polarizer and a circular polarizer.
Yeah, when I turn all the way to the end, it'll get that X shows up. And so I just learned to avoid that. But it just kind of made me think there may be times that I'm not seeing a problem on screen, but I'm causing a problem.
Sure. And what I've read is, especially when you're shooting very wide and shooting skies and things like that, that's when you're really going to notice the problems with the variable ND filter. So I think for especially the kind of stuff you do where you have a little time to set things up, a set of 3 constant ND filters probably makes more sense from a quality perspective. Now, if you're outdoors run and gun shooting and you don't have time to make those kind of filter changes, then I think, as we always say, getting the shot is more important than little niggling details like that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think a variable ND filter is very useful, and if you are doing a lot of run and gun and you're not comfortable with switching filters off, you should definitely get one. But it did always concern me having 2 pieces of glass. And actually the big reason that I stopped using it was I was doing so many time lapses and things with wide angle lenses, and I got to a point where even just that extra little thickness of a variable ND was causing vignetting in my shots. So that's why I switched to static ND filters in the first place, just to get a little bit less sticking out in front of the lens. And when I got them, I found I really liked them, and I realized I don't need a ton of variable range. I kind of know what I need.
Yeah, and I think especially for time lapses, where it's something where you have a little time to set up, that makes sense. And if you were, trying to shoot documentary style stuff where you just don't have the time to make those changes, then the variable ND filter, I can't even. I apologize for that. That was bad.
Hey, good job on your tutorial video that you posted last week.
Hey, it went pretty well, didn't it? It was actually very well received.
Yeah.
So thanks everybody for the comments. I appreciate it.
I noticed you had a bunch of views on it. Did it come from podcast viewers, or did it come from your Facebook?
No, I think I put it on a couple places in Reddit where people are excited about buying these hard drives for this purpose, and it did well there. I got really good feedback on Reddit as well.
That's what I figured. You must have done that, because a lot of the early comments were specifically about hard drives, and it felt like you had found the primary audience for that video.
Yeah, and that's really who I was making the video for, right? I know, in fact, Best Buy, by the way, they're on sale again for $179, so $20 higher than last time, but still a really good deal if you need the 8TB hard drive. So I'm probably gonna buy one more.
Cool.
And if I forget how to open it up, I'll just go watch my video.
I actually do that. It sounds funny, but I do watch my own tutorial videos sometimes because I forget things.
I used to watch your how to take a screenshot on a Mac video all the time, but now I have internalized it.
Right. Well, I think it's time for us to get going, but I do want to mention that that solar eclipse is coming up on Monday, so I think by next episode we can talk about that experience.
It's going to be exciting. Good luck. Are you flying somewhere? Have you decided?
Yeah, I'm going to do it. I'm going to go down to the Nashville area and film this thing.
That's exciting. Looking forward to it. And if anybody else gets any cool videos, definitely share them with us, right?
Yeah, definitely. In the comments, I'd love to know what people are planning to do, if they have any grand creative plans for this.
Awesome. All right, Mr. Hammond, I'm glad you did not get eaten by a bear.
Thank you. I'm glad you care.
And we'll talk to you later.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.
Well, at the moment, it seems we've lost Mr. Griffin Hammond.
Can you hear me?
I got no audio from him. Griffin, if you can hear me, I cannot hear you. We're going to try and fix that, guys. If you could just wait 1 second.
I don't know what happened to Nick.
Not good, guys. This could be the end of the podcast as we know it, because I'm finishing this podcast by myself. I may have lost my internet.